Hello, and welcome to my session today, Leveraging Power Automate in SCSM. My name is Steve Toole. I'm a consultant here at Cyerson. I've been with the company for about 8 years now, so I've worked with several different clients across several different projects, anything from implementations to migrations to some sort of customizations, automations, really anything in the realm of Service Manager or the Cyerson products. Enough about me. So a couple of housekeeping items. First off, welcome to Innovate 2022. All of these sessions will be recorded, so if you miss any, those will be available after the event. There will be a live presenter interaction after each session. So after I'm done here, I'll jump into a virtual lounge. I'll hang out there for about 30 minutes. So if you have any questions or want to just talk about anything, feel free to join. And then all day we'll have kind of a Cyerson open floor lounge. So if at any point in the day you want to jump in there, we'll have different representatives from Cyerson in there throughout the day to answer any questions that you may have. All right, so the agenda today, the first thing I want to do is talk about traditional automation in Service Manager. So what you're probably currently using for automation, look at some of the pros and cons around it, and then get into, what some newer options could be for you. So that's where we start looking at the Power Automate basics. So we'll kind of take a high level look at Power Automate, what it is, what it can do, and then we'll dive into the Cyerson Cloud Connector. So this is it's new functionality that was introduced last year at Innovate. And then we'll look at Cloud Activity, which is new functionality that's being introduced this year at Innovate. Both of these, we're going to see how they can tie into Power Automate. And of course, we'll be doing demos throughout this presentation. So I'll be flipping between PowerPoint and demos. All right. So, SCSM and automation, there's really two items that you're either doing one or the other, or you're doing both, or a mixture of both. So Orchestrator and PowerShell. From an Orchestrator perspective, the pros there are that it is native to Service Manager. So it's been around since Service Manager has been around, and it plugs right into Service Manager. There's a ton of documentation and examples out there because the products have been around for so long. You're bound to find a lot of information out there. Another pro is that you're probably already invested in it. So, you have that expertise. You have people who know Orchestrator, they're already automating certain things. And then, from an investment perspective, you also have resources that are already tied to it. So you already have servers stood up, you've got your SQL license in place. So those are two pros. One more, is you can plug into other systems, other on-prem systems, things like Active Directory. So through integration packs in Orchestrator, you can install those and you can start kind of using this drag and drop capability to automate some things in AD or Configuration Manager or Operations Manager, or really anything. You can even drop into PowerShell. So we could be doing things in PowerShell. Anything that can run PowerShell, that we can run PowerShell against, we can use that as well. Some of the cons, this one, I feel like there's people who aren't administrators of it. There's this perception of slowness. So when a runbook gets kicked off in Service Manager, it kicks off the runbook pretty quickly in Orchestrator. It does its thing in Orchestrator, it completes, and then we're sitting there waiting 2 or 3 minutes for that activity to complete in Service Manager. So, I know there's ways around it, but generally what ends up happening is if someone's testing it, if you're demoing it, you're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And of course, you're just refreshing. Everyone's been there. You're impatient. And then finally, it fails. So, it's generally not a great experience. So that's one con. The other one, I feel like when it comes to troubleshooting, it can be challenging at times. So you've got kind of logging that you can look at in Runbook Designer or in the orchestration console, but you're chasing that information, and especially if you've got like nested runbooks, you're going to end up going down several different rabbit trails just to get to where your issue is. So the troubleshooting of it, depending on how complex the runbooks are, can definitely be a challenge. One more con is, there's more servers to maintain, so there's resources that are tied to that. There's someone that has to administer it. Someone's got to support it. You got to patch it. So, that is a con in my opinion, because, you've got to stand up all that, and it's just a whole nother set of things that someone has to manage. If we look at PowerShell, so, there's two ways to look at PowerShell. There's service, you can use SMA, so service management automation, or just traditional PowerShell. Service management automation is really used to trigger a PowerShell script. So if you're using our SMA connector out of Service Manager, a pro there is that it's pretty much native, right? You can trigger these SMA runbooks, from somewhere in a process or an activity in Service Manager. Another pro here is, PowerShell it's extremely powerful. You're starting with basically a blank slate. You can go wherever you need to go with it, as long as it supports it. But it's very powerful, and it's a good skill set to have, because it not only applies to Service Manager, there's other systems and other modules that tie into other things. So once you understand PowerShell, you can start applying that in other systems, on other workloads, and it's something great to put on your resume, honestly. Some cons, so there is a learning curve. Looking at this screenshot here, if you're not used to PowerShell or you're not comfortable with it, this can be a little intimidating. So, there's definitely a learning curve and time that needs to go into it. Thinking back when I first started at Cyerson, I really didn't dabble in PowerShell that much. So I had to start slow. I was a little intimidated, but over time, through either starting small and growing from there, or taking a script that I know works and kind of reverse engineering it, you're able to build that skill set pretty quickly. Another item is really the logging. So because these scripts are kind of a blank slate, the logging is really up to the author of the script. So where are we going to log? When are we going to log? How are we going to log? You're totally tied to whatever the author thinks. So when it comes to troubleshooting, depending on how the logging was set up, it can definitely be a challenge. Another thing is really just maintainability. So, in every organization, these things get handed off from group to group, from team to team, whatever, from admin to admin. And because the PowerShell scripts are really, up to the author to define and everything, you'll notice over the years, the way variables are named is different. The way the logging is set up is probably different. So you can end up with a lot of things that you got to dig through and understand across all these different. So, what else? What else is there? So that kind of leads into Power Automate. So Power Automate is an online tool within Microsoft 365, and it's really used for the creation of automated workflows between apps and services. So, Power Automate these apps and services, it's really you use what's called a connector. So connectors are what you can use to create what they call these flows. So think of a flow as kind of a runbook, if you're, in the Orchestrator world. And these connectors, you can go out to Azure AD, Forms, Outlook, Teams, SQL, and then even non-Microsoft stuff. So Dropbox, Gmail, Twitter. There's a host of connectors that I'll show you here in a minute that are already there for you, and there's already predefined triggers and templates, which we'll get into here in a second. You can kind of think of a connector as really an integration pack almost. Not really, but kind of. It's a, automate, you really all you do is authenticate to it, and then you have that connection. So when we're talking about these flows, obviously something has to start them. So these are the triggers. So the first one is just like an instant flow. So that's just saying, hey, start, or kind of a manual trigger. The next one is automated. So this is where you're saying, hey, when something changes and calls this flow, that's your trigger. So, you can do things like, hey, when I receive an email in Outlook, start this flow. When a message gets posted in Teams, start this flow. Or even, when this webhook gets called, as you'll see in a little while, start this flow. Those are the automated ones. And then you've got scheduled. So scheduled are pretty self-explanatory. Run every morning at 6, run every 2 hours, run every Friday at 5, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got our triggers that start the flow, and then you're defining the steps that happen when it gets triggered. So these are what are called the actions. These are the kind of doing a thing. So when you get triggered, take these actions across these apps and these services. So you're kind of building out, if you think about it like Orchestrator, you're defining those activities and what steps it needs to take. And then lastly, they have templates. So these are kind of predefined flows. There are a host of them, which we'll see here in a second, that someone's already thought of, hey, this is a very manual task. I would love to create a template for it so that other people can use it and quickly kind of import it into their tenant. So there's a bunch of stuff in there, and it gives you very good information around how many downloads. So obviously the more downloads, the more useful it probably is. So those are kind of some basic concepts. Go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. All right, so I'm here in Power Automate. So right, cloud-based, Microsoft 365, no servers, you don't have to host anything locally. First thing we can look at are connectors. So they've kind of got it sectioned out. I'm just going to scroll down to the all connectors part. So you can see here, here's all your connectors that you get out of the box for your flows. So you can connect into your Outlook. It'll let you authenticate into Outlook and read your mailbox and do something based on that. Forms, Planner, there's a ton of stuff. Teams, Twitter, there's outside of Microsoft, Gmail, MSN Weather. There's a bunch here. I mean, I'm scrolling right now, and it's, even think about if you've got like an HR system or something, they may have a connector already here in Power Automate. So it's definitely something that you could really leverage, as you'll see in a little bit, how we can really tie back into Service Manager. So if I just clicked on, look here, for some reason, some of these aren't loaded that quickly. So SharePoint. There's a connector for SharePoint. These are all the triggers that can start a flow. So that's my connector, and there's a wide range of things that can start this. We've also got templates down here. So we'll actually jump over into the templates section so that you can see how many. There's a bunch. I mean, there's a ton here that are predefined for you. And if we take a look at one, do this, create a task in Planner. So it's telling you right here, this template is going to connect to your Outlook and then to Planner as this user. So this is, I'm logged in as myself. I'm already authenticated here. When I hit continue, it takes me into this. It's really the main part of my flow here. So, when we're minimized, we're defining that workflow. How are things gonna, once it gets triggered, what else is gonna happen? What actions are we gonna take? So in this case, this is the calendar tied to my account that I'm logged into. I'm telling it when a new event is created on my calendar for this particular group, whatever it is, I want to create a new task, and I want to give it the subject of whatever that calendar event is. So when I click here, we can see there's a host of variables that we can use from previous steps. So it's called dynamic content here. So the more steps you add above, you'll be able to, you'll have those kind of variables at your disposal in actions down below. So here we're just grabbing the subject of the event, start date, and end date. And if you wanted to, you could also have it do something else. So the cool thing about the templates is you can start with kind of a generic template and then build it out from there. What else? So just to show under, so you can also start, your own flow from kind of a blank slate. So here you're defining that, what we talked about, those triggers. So what type of a trigger is going to start this flow? So scheduled, instant, automated. And then the other part here, you've got this monitor. So this will let you kind of look at, this is kind of a overview of all the different things that have been happening with your flow. So whether or not they've been failing, been running, whatever here. So that's just kind of a basic look. In the next few demos, I'll definitely dive a little more into these. And you'll see some with a lot more steps and a lot more actions. Let's jump back over to the deck. Those are kind of the basics on Power Automate. Next up is I wanted to talk through the Cloud Connector. So the Cloud Connector was introduced last year at Innovate. So Innovate 2021. It's functionality that you get you got to be on version 11 of the SCSM portal. And there's really two sides to it. There's a REST API side, and there's also a kind of a webhooks other API side to it. So from a REST APIs side of things, you're getting these new APIs that are really flattened and a lot easier to work with. So the traditional APIs in the SMP were very challenging to work with. And I mean, you needed documentation, you needed examples, very hard to work with. The new ones are extremely straightforward. So you're just telling it IR 18 and it's going to just bring back everything tied to that IR. The other thing around these REST APIs is because they're on the platform, we're using a platform token for authentication. So the traditional APIs, you had to do several calls. You had to pass a username and password just to get an authentication token. Security people never like that. So these new ones, you can generate a platform token. It's a bearer token and use it for your authentication. So if you ever get compromised, whatever, it's not a compromised username and password. It's just a token. You can remove it. You can generate a new one. The other side of this are the outgoing. So, these are really, in the portal, it's called webhooks, that section of the admin settings. You'll see it in a little bit. These are basically saying, hey, when an event happens in Service Manager, so when an incident is created, call this webhook or call this URL and send these parameters. When a service request is complete, call this webhook, call this API, whatever, and send, that information over to it. Parameters, whatever it is. So, looking at this picture over here, you're either using these, from a cloud services perspective, so that would be the kind of Power Automate type stuff, or you're using them just on-prem. You don't need to think of them as we have to be, they can only be used for cloud-based stuff. We can do things with it, both incoming and outgoing, on-prem, so you're not, having to expose stuff, in the cloud or outside of your network. Now, Power Automate, we're looking at this side of things, and that's kind of what this presentation is around. So, there's different, I know security people are screaming whenever they see something like this. There are a lot of things you can do to tighten your security around these APIs, especially on the outgoing side. So those, we saw webhooks, or I've kind of talked about webhooks a little. You can use a webhook to kick off like a Power Automate flow. You can wrap those in Azure API management. And what that does is it gives you a lot more security. So you can do things like, I only accept calls from this source IP address. There's a lot of options there. On the incoming side, a lot of that has to do with, how your security is set up currently, but there's definitely options out there. I don't want you to think that it's just not doable. All right, so the first demo here, we're going to look at the Cloud Connector, kind of the incoming REST API side of it. So we're going to look at a flow that basically gets kicked off from a button, so like a manual flow. And when it gets kicked off, it's going to do something in Service Manager through actions in that flow using these REST APIs. Let's check it out. First thing I want to do here is just a minute here, refresh my portal. All right, we're going to look at this service request. And it's got activities here. And we've got this, someone requested an engineering laptop, and it's waiting for Joe Smith here to approve it. So, the scenario here is, Joe is out of the office, or he is too busy, or he just doesn't want to do it. And you get pinged to, hey, we need, maybe his manager to vote on this. We need someone else to approve it. We need to get this pushed through. So, as always, when stuff like that happens, you're never online. You're at the grocery store, you're at the beach, whatever it is. But what I want to show you is how we can use the Power Automate app to initiate this flow. Let me get connected in on my phone. And give me just a minute. Add my device. Share my screen. Start. Go. All right. So I've got this app that you can download on any device or automate. And, you know, right off the bat with the app, you've got different sections here where you could actually, you know, this is the approval section. We'll see here in a minute. You've got a feed here. This is that kind of monitor section that we saw in the, you know, in our browser earlier. You've got buttons, which we'll do here in a minute. Flows. So these are all my flows, the ones I have created. You can actually look at them. I want to edit here. You can look at run history. But really what I want to show here is, so this is a manual flow, right? I'm at the grocery store. I got the email. You know, I know there's other ways to do this, but, you know, I just want to highlight, you know, what you could get out of by using a Power Automate flow and using the app on your phone. So it's asking me for the RA number. So I have that here. It is RA 117. Sure, I typed it right. I'm just going to send it to myself so I can show you that approval process here. But you know, it could potentially be a different manager. So here we go. It says it started, and then here we'll see up at the top here in a minute. There's that approval request. So whoever you sent that approval to gets this approval here. This is something native to Power Automate, and it will, you know, it's giving me information about, this is the RA number, this is the title, these are the details. And then of course they come here and they say, yeah, sure, why not? So the request has been approved. What I'm going to do now is flip back over to my screen. So that. To leave the meeting on this device. Here. Share. And here's that ticket we were looking at. Just going to refresh. And as you can see here, this thing's already been approved. So in a matter of about 20 seconds, you know, it's got me as the voted by user, right? I voted on behalf of Joe. I approved it. And now it's on its way, you know, to where it needs to be. So let's take a look at the actual flow, what that looks like in Power Automate. We're here. Flows. Get approval from someone else. I'm going to go to edit. So here you can see that this is the manual trigger, right? This is something I set. I used that create button over here and said it was going to be a manual trigger. You define the inputs. So where it was asking me, you know, those 2 questions on the app, it's tracking, you know, what I put in there so that it can be used in steps further on down the line. So the RA that I entered in there, it's using, excuse me, to call that REST API, the Cloud Connector API there. So it's also sending in a, you know, here's that bearer token. For the record, I will be deleting that right after this session. I believe you can variabilize that, but I was just getting stuff done quickly. We're parsing the JSON. So here, you information about that request. So whatever that RA was. So we're parsing that JSON. This is something that looks a little scary, but you can actually generate from a sample. So once you've called one of these once, you'll see what the data comes back as, and you just say generate from sample, and it'll automatically build this out for you. And it's just telling it kind of the structure of the data, what fields to expect, and what type of a field it is. And then we do the start and wait for approval. So this is that thing that's kind of native to Power Automate. And you have a type. The title is the display name from that JSON. So the display name of the review activity, who it's assigned to. So that's who I said under approval from. And then the description of the RA, so that those details around that laptop request are in there, as you saw through the app. And then once someone's either approved or rejected, I then have a condition here. So this is where you can do kind of that if-else stuff. And I'm saying if the outcome is equal to approved, go ahead and call, another cloud connector, a REST API, and approve the activity in Service Manager. So all of this happened, within 15, 20 seconds. The one other thing worth noting here is, you've got these if-else conditions. You can also do things like for each or like a switch case. And those can get really tricky in Orchestrator, really, really tricky. A lot of the times you have to drop into PowerShell. So they're a lot easier to work with here in Power Automate. So I just wanted to point that out. All right, let's jump back into the deck. All right, the next thing I wanted to do was, talk about or show a demo around the other end of this cloud connector, so the outgoing side of it. So kicking off a web flow based on something that happens in Service Manager. All right, for this one, first going to get my order of stuff here. Within the portal, admin settings, here's that cloud connector, so REST API. You look at that, this is kind of documentation, and here's that sample data that you could use in that parse JSON to just paste in there, and you only have to do it once, and then you're good. But this is information on the various endpoints that you're getting via this new via the new REST API. But for this demo, we're looking at webhooks, the next one. So I'm saying on an incident, so you're able to add classes here, and you're basically saying, when it's created, in this case, I'm saying when it's created, I want you to post to this webhook and send some kind of data. So you can send different parameters in your header, depending on what you're trying to do, with wherever you're posting to or getting from. So really what I'm going to highlight in this demo is we're going to, when an incident is created, we are going to call a webhook. And that webhook is going to determine whether or not the incident was a priority 1 or not. So it's a little interactive. I need to actually going to turn off my background. No judgment on anything you see. So I've got a light here. I'm actually going to turn it on real quick. White light, it's got a Wi-Fi enabled light bulb in it. So I can connect to it from, from my phone or from anywhere and kind of change things. So what I'm going to do is I've got a flow set up that when an incident is created, if it's a P1, I'm going to change the light to red. So let's have a look here. Go ahead and hit new incident. We'll just call it tab 1, give it no data, ever good. But most importantly, we're going to make it a P1. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. That's been set. See here. All right, guys, changing from white to pink. It's going to be red here in a second. It's not as easy to see for whatever reason on Teams, but that thing is definitely red. You can kind of see it reflecting off my head. Either way, so let's look at the flow around that. So what I'm going to do is first put my background and turn off that light so you don't get that reflection. All right, let's look at that flow. So under my flows, we've got this new incident. And under edit, we've got, sorry, I've got it. Cat trying to get in. So under this flow, we've got, it's initiated via that webhook. So I define that in Cloud Connector. So that outgoing webhook, I say, when an incident is created, call it. So that's what this is here. I'm parsing that JSON. So once again, what does the data look like that's coming across? And I've got this condition. So this if-else part of it. If it's a priority 1, it's going to go down this path. And obviously, well, not obviously, I've got it sending me an email. That's just for troubleshooting purposes. But most importantly, it's activating this scene. So this scene, that's the service tied to that, the manufacturer of that light bulb. Edge case here, but, I just wanted to highlight that we can use these flows, right? You can use Power Automate to tap into a wide range of different apps and services. It doesn't have to be all Microsoft related. There's a bunch out there that you probably don't even realize is out there. All right, let's move along here. Sure. Sharing, yep, and slide. Oh, all right, so there are those demos. All right, the next item I wanted to talk through is this new functionality or new kind of product that is being announced this year. So it's called Cloud Activity. It's a new type of activity that you can drop into your workflows or into your incidents that allows you to either call some sort of a webhook or endpoint and pass parameters from that request into it. It also is rolling PowerShell activity into it. So if you've been using PowerShell activity and you've tried to add it to IRs, you weren't allowed to do that before. So now we can actually do that with this new cloud activity. So both of those are going to be rolled into this one activity. And, from the webhook side, once again, it's saying when activated, we're going to see it here, in this picture here. When I'm activated, I'm going to call a webhook. I'm going to call a flow in Power Automate, and I'm going to add a user to an AD group. So let's see what this looks like. So here's my demo. I just set it, SR that adds a user to an Azure AD group. So some sort of a cloud software that, they need to be a member of a group in Azure AD. Come over here. Well, I've already got a request here for Tracy Brown. And, it's for her to get access to this particular software. So from an activities perspective, we need that manager approval. And then it's going to click off. This is the it's going to kick off the cloud activity here. And once that's done, it's going to then move into the install part. So that's, something that goes to desktop or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and approve it so we can get it kicked off. And one thing I'm going to do is show you that Tracy, not currently a member of that group. So it's cool cloud software members. So no one in there right now. That's been approved. I'm going to call that cloud activity. It's going to call the webhook. So let's take a look at that. We'll look at that in the console. So come over here. I think I've got a different SR now. 11094. That request. So here's that. We know that's running right now. Now, this is kind of an early release of it. So no judgment on the UI or anything. It's still definitely being worked on. But, we wanted to just highlight kind of the direction it's going. So here, your automation type. So when you're creating these, you're creating the template for it. You're either selecting PowerShell or Webhook. In this demo, we're calling a webhook, and we want to pass some kind of a custom body. We're doing a post, JSON, and I'll hit cancel here. So that webhook, calling a flow. So if I come over to my flows, go to this add user to group. See here, I believe it already ran 32 seconds ago. So this is one thing, when you go into each flow, you get this run history, which is obviously very helpful. I can actually look at this, and you can see based on these green check marks that everything looked good. So, and it went through. Let's just validate real quick. Jump right back. So now Tracy is in there, as you can see. And so this webhook receives the information from that request, right? So it was for Tracy, it was for that particular software. And that's stuff that you're going to be able to map into it. And it's sending an email to me just for troubleshooting. More importantly, it's getting the user an AD. It's showing you that it got Tracy, and then it got the group, and then it's adding the user to the group. So, if we go back here just to show one other thing, if you go to like all runs, here's, this is everything, and this is probably me setting it up and failing miserably. But when you click on like the failed ones, so this is that kind of logging thing, that's sometimes a struggle in PowerShell and in Orchestrator. You've got everything you need right here on this page. You can click on this to get your error. You can, you've got error details over here. It's just, it's a lot cleaner, and it's a lot easier to troubleshoot. jump back here. One other thing I wanted to show. Well, so you've got, one thing you can do is per flow, you get this unique GUID that you could drop into all of those cloud activity templates so that if you see that the cloud activity fails, you can have a link here that just drops them directly to here. So they can get immediately to this run history, or whoever's troubleshooting it, and get to the bottom of it and see what happened pretty quickly. All right. Share again. All right, we got a little more time. I wanted to throw this one in here. This is also something I'm super stoked about. It's also being kind of announced at Innovate this year. So it's the idea of this SMP Power Automate connector. So when we were talking about connectors earlier in Power Automate, I never said anything about a Cyrusson SMP connector, right? We were doing all that through the cloud connector. So the REST API endpoints or the webhooks out of Cloud Connector. So this is something, it's very new, but the idea here is just like you saw on some of those other apps and services, we can drag and drop these actions, right? These actions into your flows to make it a lot easier to do things on the service manager side of things. So in the other ones, I'm having to know API endpoints, I'm having to read JSON, so that part can be a little tricky. This makes it a lot easier for people to pick it up quicker. So I can show, I don't have a working one because I literally just got my hands on it, but I can at least show you kind of what that would look and feel like within a flow. So here's the bonus. Of course, I'm failing right now, but I will fix it. So, here's a flow that's being triggered. So when a new email arrives in an inbox, I'm getting the email, and then maybe, like the Exchange connector where, I'm not saying this is replacing the Exchange connector or anything, but same idea here. I'm getting the email. In the subject, if it's a mailbox where maybe you're sending stuff from other systems, so, it could be coming from anywhere. We're getting the data we need so that we know how to get the work item ID, and then we're maybe based on that, we're going to update certain fields within it. So this is going to be really slick. One other thing I can show, like if I was adding a new step, and I go under custom, this is where we're at right now with all the different actions. And there's even, there's probably more coming. So you should be able to do quite a few things. A lot of the stuff you're doing in Orchestrator. So the people who like the kind of drag and drop UI side of it, this aligns with that a lot. So just wanted to show you that just a little bit. I am going to stop sharing. All right, so that's the end of the session. The one thing I want to make sure you get here is we're not saying that Power Automate, you need to replace Orchestrator and PowerShell with Power Automate. We want to give you more functionality and more options as it relates to, as more and more stuff, more and more loads are moving into the cloud, or, more and more integration stuff is needed that's coming from other places. Power Automate is an option, as you can see here, especially, with these three different ways that we kind of showed here. So Cloud Connector, both incoming and outgoing, and then also this new SMP connector and cloud activity. So thanks for joining my session today. I hope you gained a little bit of knowledge here. And if you have any questions or want to chat, I will be in the lounge for about the next 30 minutes. Thank you.